Hello and welcome to another episode of Budget Photography, and in this episode I'll be focusing on long exposure, specifically more on creating that light trail that you usually see in like postcards or wallpaper, like if you're traveling and, well, if you see travel photographers usually post pictures of like streets and you have a lot of that light trail from the streets but you don't see any cars. So I'm going to be focusing more on that, and since I live on like the 15th floor, I don't need to go out. I have the view of the street perfectly right in my windows, well, out of the window. So yeah, I can just set up my tripod and then start working. And the gear that we'll be using is obviously this 300D. It's an old DSLR from 2003, I believe. It's a 6.1 megapixel camera, and this is an 18-200 lens, and whenever I can, I'll be using the 50mm f1.8 from Yongnuo. But in this case, we won't be focusing at f1.8. We're actually going to be focusing more on the higher aperture, so more like f8, f10, f11, f9, between those apertures, because we want everything to be in focus in this kind of picture. And because we will be working with the tripod anyway, so the exposure will need to be long. And we're not gonna, well, I'm not going to worry about having shaky images because, you know, I'm going to be indoor, and the tripod that I'm going to be used is definitely usually built for outdoors. So yeah, everything should go pretty well and smooth. And I think the main challenge with this camera now is because it's such an old camera, the dynamic range to file is not going to be as good, and especially in long exposure. So usually cameras, even modern cameras, the challenging part other than shooting high ISO is long exposure. Long exposure images usually result in, you know, a little bit lesser dynamic range to play with in post. And this is an entry-level camera, which means it has even lesser dynamic range, and the fact that it's from 2003 with 6.1 megapixels, technology from 2003, it's gonna be even less, like, so the room to play with in post. So I think the images that I will be looking at today is just gonna make it a little bit higher exposure, so I can just bring the highlights down a bit rather than pulling the shadows, which is probably almost no room to play with anyway with the shadows. So I'm not saying that there are a lot of rooms to play with the highlight, but I think it's better to get more things out of the detail, like more detail, and then just kind of add a little bit of vibrance, and lowering down the highlights will make it look more interesting than having like everything evenly exposed, but there's not a lot of room to play with. Yeah, so let's just get started. So this is the view that I'm seeing right now out of the window. So yeah, I think it'll be just good enough to demonstrate the long exposure for today's shooting. So I'm right now at 1/6 of a second. The sky just went completely dark, though the moon is actually quite nice. It's actually really yellowish, full moon kind of thing, but yeah, you can't really see it well on the camera. But right now, the challenge right now is also with the lens, because this lens is a lens that kind of fall on its own weight, which means that if it's too front heavy or anything, the lens will kind of move forward or backward based on the gravity. So that's another downside that I have to be careful, because on long exposure I do not want, or you do not want the lens to start moving on its own, because it will cause like blurry image in your final result. So yeah, as of now, I'm gonna trust the metering of this camera. The metering of this camera says, okay, at 1/6 of a second, I'm kind of okay. And another thing with shooting long exposure is to always go with self timer. And it's this button up here. Okay, I'm seeing self timer. Okay, you can only set self timer up to 10 seconds. There are no 2 seconds on here. So I'm gonna focus and wait. And now the light is beeping. Taking the shot. 6 seconds. It looks pretty okay. And now I'm actually gonna go a little bit brighter. Say 8 seconds. I'm gonna try another one with 8 seconds. Alright, 8 seconds also looks pretty good, and the last one at 10 seconds. And I think you should be able to get the idea. Also, like the longer seconds you put on your camera, the more line you get, the more intense the lines will look, because you open the curtain up for a little bit longer amount of time, and then there are just more lines drawn and longer lines as well. So yeah, it's gonna look a bit more dramatic, but you also have to try to adjust the ISO and everything. Right now, because I don't know how strong the file will be in the editing program, so I'm just trying different exposure but still using the same aperture settings, which is f8, I believe. Yep, f8 and ISO 100. But usually when you try to adjust your aperture, your shutter, when you know you have the absolute correct ISO and aperture and you're only adjusting for your shutter speed, usually if you're just adjusting your shutter speed, you can also try to compensate it with the ISO and aperture and what have you. And for like as of white balance, I have it on auto white balance, because in this scenario, like judging from the back of the screen, it seems like it's getting it correct. But I'm shooting everything in RAW, so if I don't get it correct, the RAW file will actually help me to change it in post. And yeah, so that's just taking images with this camera right now. And now I'm just gonna try a wider view and try to include the moon, but obviously the moon will look like just a white dot in the sky, simply because it's too bright, too far, and yeah. Alright, try like when I zoom out, like really out to see the moon and the curve of the river. Because the majority of the actual scene is black color, so the camera thinks that everything is too dark, so it needs to overexpose a little bit. That's why the metering went all the way down. So then I adjusted to 15 seconds. It's still down, but I don't want to over adjust it, because I don't want the street to be blown out. Because as you see with our image of the street, it was kind of already okay. And if I were to make it brighter, the street would probably be blown out, and I don't want the street to be blown out. And I just want the dark part to also be dark. I don't want to raise up the shadows and everything, because I know that even with the naked eye, it is still dark. And I only want to have like the curve of the river. And another challenge I'm facing is because I usually shoot everything in live view when it comes to long exposure, because then I can also adjust the balance, but there's nothing in the viewfinder here. My 5D Mark III, my 70D and so on, and my more modern mirrorless cameras and other DSLRs actually has leveling inside its optical viewfinder. And even in live view, when they have live view, you can also see the leveling, but there's no live view on here and there's no leveling on here, and I don't have the spirit level for the camera, so I'm kind of hoping that everything is, if anything, it's close to being balanced as possible. Then I don't have to crop in heavily so that I just balance it off, because it's super annoying to have like an unbalanced image. Anyway, I'm just gonna try and take a shot now. So this is actually the final result. So as far as I can see from the screen is that it's not overexposed here and I still can see the moon. It is not level, so I will try to make it more level. The battery keep on showing that it's one line left, but it's fully charged based on the charger, so I'm not sure about that whenever it dies. But yeah, it seems to handle everything like pretty clearly from here, but I will need to take several images so that I have backup. Kind of like, if this is not the real correct exposure that I wanted, I can always change it. So as the camera is taking the pictures right now, and a lot of flies are actually getting into my room, so I think after this shot I'll take another shot that it's a bit darker, so at 10 seconds. This one was 20 seconds and I just did a couple with 15 seconds, and the next one is gonna be 10 seconds. And yeah, and I think I'll just call it end of the shoot. Yeah. So 2 hours later I managed to paint my top 3 images out of like 6 or 7 images that I've taken with different exposures, of course. Yeah, so I just exported it right now. I did some like very minor adjustments. As I said, this camera, like the file isn't that robust, so all I did was like maybe maximum 20% of recovery, like both shadows and highlights. It didn't really show such huge difference apart from like highlights, but with shadows, even if you pull it up all the way to 100%, you'll just add more noise. All of these images were taken with ISO base level, which was 100. And yeah, I'm actually quite pleased with the sharpness, because the lens itself is actually not that sharp optically, but when it's paired with the 300D, which has the lower resolution, it became, well, it looked kind of sharp. Like if you were to mount it on like a 7D Mark II, then that lens would look optically super not sharp. Anyway, this is the image. Well, these are the 3 images that I've taken, well, chose. So this is the first one. So there's a really nice long like light trail here and here, both red and yellow. Nice contrast, I think. As a 300D, I think it did kind of fine. If you zoom in here, you'll see that the boat, the streets and everything is really sharp, nice in focus. The second image is a little bit more balanced than the first one, and it shows a different light pattern, which is what I kind of like more, because it's a little bit different than this. Because this is more straight and this is more kind of like spread out kind of pattern, which is nice. And another thing is here. This is the wider shot, and yeah, it's a different shot. I actually took quite some time to get this shot, because this, like, I did not process it in post to get the balance, but it's pretty much balanced. And yeah, it does not look like a picture that was shot with like a camera from the year 2003. But it's pretty usable. If you want to upload it to Instagram, Facebook, social media, it's totally usable. And this image was not cropped by any means. Sorry, my camera died on me. Not sure why. But yeah. Anyway, those were the 3 images that I have chosen. And yeah. Thank you very much for watching. It's pretty late now. It took longer than I thought with all the processing and everything, and I also have to, like, having to spend 2 hours getting rid of the flies. It's like almost 2 now in the morning, and I have an appointment in Delft, which is a different city, tomorrow at around 10. So I better clean everything up, which will probably take another hour. and go to sleep and get ready for tomorrow. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something. And yeah, have fun shooting. Bye!